in case you guys aren't familiar, I'm sure you guys are familiar, but there was a massively lengthy multi-day event in American politics that for once caused everyone in the country to stop in their tracks and actually pay attention to how their government worked. And many people thought this was a good thing, but some people thought it sucked. You know, surprisingly, most of those people happen to be in the mainstream media. Wow. But for the most part, a lot of people were just fascinated by the process. Basically, what happened was you had Kevin McCarthy, a Republican who was, vying for the position of the House Speaker after the GOP's minimal gains in the House over these past midterm elections. He was, trying to, get the spot that he really wanted. Turns out that this is something that he's wanted for years and years now. And now he thought that he had a chance to grab it easily. Well, not so fast, because you had 20 folks from the Freedom Coalition, which is kind of like a right-wing organization, who kind of like they pledged some sort of like agreement to like conservative values or something. They coalesced and they got enough votes to block Kevin McCarthy's, attempt to preside over and kind of run the House. And so, the first vote didn't work. So they voted again. And then they voted like the third time. And Kevin McCarthy is actually bleeding votes. He's losing votes. And this happens time and time again. Kevin McCarthy ends up losing like 14 times, I think. It took 15 votes for him to get this position. And this is in large part because this Freedom Coalition. Now, the mainstream media has kind of tried to smear the Freedom Coalition by saying that they're all like far right and alt right. And it is true that some of them are far right, some of them are alt right. Some of the ones who aren't even like alt right have flirted with, things such as like supporting January 6th. However, a lot of them are just normal conservatives who are actually trying to abide by, what they said. Because Kevin McCarthy is by no means your typical conservative. He is a lot more moderate. He's what many would call a rhino, which is Republican in name only. He's not known for really standing up for conservative values. He's known for selling out to the Democratic Party a lot. Matt Gaetz and Lauren Boebert were two of the main people opposing him. And one thing that's interesting about this whole process, I just gotta say before we get into what Matt Gaetz and Lauren Boebert reveal about what Kevin McCarthy had to do in order to get their support, I just think it's really, really interesting. I think that this kind of revealed who like the true like actual conservatives are. So for example, Marjorie Taylor Greene. A lot of you guys probably, especially, I think a lot of my viewers are left-wing, right? A lot of y'all are lefties. So you guys would be surprised. Marjorie Taylor Greene supported Kevin McCarthy staunchly from the beginning and all the way throughout the end. And her excuse kind of was, oh, well, he's Donald Trump's boy. Donald Trump picked him. Well, that doesn't really excuse you supporting someone who is a rhino. So I think that kind of, revealed Marjorie Taylor Greene as being like somewhat of a shill. So I find that kind of interesting. But a lot of people were wondering, what did Kevin McCarthy give up that allowed Matt Gaetz and Lauren Boebert to be like, okay, we want to go ahead and vote for you now, or at least kind of stand out of your way. Because the way it worked was they voted present, which lowered the threshold and allowed Kevin McCarthy to win. So they sat down and talked with Laura Ingraham, now of Fox News, previously of Premier Networks and Westwood One, doing talk radio terrestrially. I heard some stuff about what was agreed to. I haven't heard everything. So this will kind of be interesting and educational for me, because I'm hearing about this for the first time.
It's language used to describe, among others, my next two guests, both instrumental in gaining concessions from newly minted Speaker Kevin McCarthy.
It's just that like fight night moment where like some dude comes and like wraps his hand around somebody else's face. That was an interesting moment.
Joining us now, Florida Congressman Matt Gaetz, Colorado Congresswoman Lauren Boebert. Great to see.
I gotta say, Matt Gaetz looks like a 3D rendering of like a parody of a politician here. I was gotta say, maybe it's the camera quality. I don't know.
See both of you, Congressman Gaetz. How confident are you that the concessions that you guys ended up winning are enforceable and you can hold on to them for these next 2 years?
Just moments ago, we passed the rules for the 118th Congress, and those included the enforcement mechanism of the one-member motion to vacate. Now,
Good. This is what I've been hearing pundits talk about. This is a key thing that the Freedom Caucus got, that it seems like will ensure that Kevin McCarthy abides by what he promised, because all the time politicians promise this and promise that, but they don't actually do what they said that they were going to do. But with this option to have anybody in the House say, hey, let's have a vote on kicking out the current Speaker of the House, this forces Kevin McCarthy to kind of abide by the will of not just the moderate mainstream folks, but also consider what the Freedom Coalition wants to put forth to the table. Because hey, any one of them can just be like, hey, I want you out, and boom, we go back to the same process that we were at almost a week ago. So that's interesting. That's great news, I think, because I think that that's great for the country to, have checks and balances on this man's power and force him to do what he agreed to, because a lot of times politicians are not held to that. It's very rare to see that, and this is something very refreshing when it comes to American politics.
I don't anticipate that we'll ever have to use that, but it gives us the opportunity to ensure that our goals regarding policy, procedure, and personnel are met. We're going to have votes on term limits, balanced budgets, internal enforcement of our immigration laws. None of those things would have happened if we had caved on Monday, but by getting these concessions and coming to a stronger place, the House is in a stronger position.
Now, here's how the Democrats are responding to the rules package just passed moments ago.
Yo, I'm looking forward to seeing some molding and falling apart. Like, the whole mainstream, which by the way Fox News is part of, has kind of been like up in arms and like upset about it. And it's actually betrayed how like Fox News is kind of mainstream and not actually conservative, because you see some of the lackeys be like, they just need to vote in McCarthy and then argue with him about what they want later, like acting as if Kevin McCarthy is some like good conservative. Like, I heard Mark Levin on the radio kind of trying to pitch about how like Kevin McCarthy is like some guy who's gonna try and get things done, and we're not getting any work done, so we need to go ahead and put him in so we can get work done. The whole point is that we didn't want McCarthy in, blocking a lot of that work that we wanted to get done for 2 years. Would be the point then if we're voting him in, if we're not going to get half the things that we had wanted to do and half of the things that these congressmen had actually gone out and won elections by promising that they would do these things. So it was very, very good that, you had some actual conservatives who didn't have their hands tied by like big money, especially independent voices, going out and supporting the Freedom Caucus.
These rules are not a serious attempt at governing. They're essentially a ransom note to America from the extreme right. They're still empowering the extremists. Don't take my word for it. Let's go through their rules package. They're giving a single member the ability to remove the speaker at any time, letting a small far-right faction hold their leadership hostage.
Congress.
Far right, the Democrats could do the same thing. Now, granted, they're probably not going to get the handful of votes that they would need to work with, enough, Republicans to kind of get Kevin McCarthy ousted. But this doesn't just hold Kevin McCarthy accountable to the far right, holds him accountable to everyone. Because anyone at any point can just like throw out the yellow flag, call a penalty.
This empowers every individual member of Congress, even the Democrats. That single member motion to vacate is for them as well. These single subject legislation pieces that we're going to see, this is something that we have in 47 state legislatures. To have it on a federal level is massive. So I'm proud.
It's huge. That single issue thing is probably one of the best things to happen in American politics in the past 50 years. Like very, very much, full stop. What these folks did was far better for the country than anything that like any recent president that I can even think of has done. Far better than anything that Trump did, even though I think he was a pretty good president, more or less. Far better than anything that George W. Bush did, for sure, and Obama as well, Bill Clinton, all those folks. This is like one of the greatest leaps and bounds towards making great political progress, change, and not just that. This is really at the core reform to how the political system works in Washington.
That we took a few extra days to make sure that we get this right. It may look like chaos and dysfunction, but I'm a mom of 4 boys. That's a part of my everyday life. And really, last week was the most productive week I have experienced in Congress.
People really saw behind the curtain of what happens in Washington, stuff that I've been railing against for 20 plus years, 25 years.
And one thing it kind of like revealed how a lot of the mainstream folks were kind of just like shilling and trying to actually not let this progress get done, not let anyone see what's going on behind the scenes, because as people were kind of looking and they were like, okay, well, the guy I voted for is actually doing what's, what I voted him in to do. He's actually like trying to keep this person who's a rhino kind of like out of power. Or on the other side, you saw a lot of people being like looking and being like, hey, I voted for this person. I thought she was a conservative, but here she's on the phone talking to Donald Trump, kind of just like sucking up to him and supporting this rhino just because Donald Trump told her to. Well, that's not what I voted her in for. I voted her in to be a conservative, not just to be a mouthpiece for Donald Trump within the House of Representatives. So as a lot of people were seeing that, I think that the mainstream is getting a lot more aggravated, because the mainstream wants to funnel to you what's happening. They don't want a lot of other people kind of interfering with their messaging. They want to be your intermediary between what's happening. If you want to know what's happening, they want you to go through them. They will tell you what they want you to know. But with the increased transparency, C-SPAN was streaming this event live on YouTube to tons and tons of views, rivaling views that I've seen of like Tim Pool on YouTube, who is like the biggest political streamer on the platform right now. So just with all of these factors coming into play, the left getting mad that people are actually getting more transparency into the government, as well as like the mainstream media, including like Fox News, all very, very upset. Especially when it seems like we're moving towards a more conservative government rather than a moderate government, which the media generally will always try to coalesce and move politics into a moderate position, which makes sense. Moderate politics is a lot more palatable and a lot easier to support. So, of course, it's going to be what's supported in mainstream messaging. But all of that to say that it kind of just exposed, a lot of people who things were transparent. It was very transparent what was actually happening. And then you line that up with the mainstream narratives, and you really got a chance to see how there's just such a big disconnect a lot of times between what's actually happening and what the mainstream narrative is.
These omnibus spending bills, nobody knows what's in them. It's just junk in the kitchen sink thrown in. Things that congressmen and senators don't want to be held accountable for. So you can't say, you voted against border enforcement. What they say, Congressman Gaetz, is, oh, no, I just voted to keep the government open. That's essentially what they do, correct?
Well, and the whole sum of this movement was to ensure that never again would we be forced to take a vote on something like this omnibus legislation. And I actually think this will make Kevin McCarthy stronger as a speaker, because in negotiating with the Senate, he'll be able to say, I'm sorry, the House rules don't allow us to consider things that aren't germane or that don't...
No. I mean, he's not telling the truth here. It does tie Kevin McCarthy's hands. He doesn't have the... because the thing is, because he's the Speaker of the House, he could, push for whatever rules that he wants. And I think he has some level of veto power, if I'm not mistaken. So it's not entirely true to be like, oh, this will make Kevin McCarthy a stronger speaker. No, it'll make him a better one, but we'll make him a stronger one.
Comport to a single subject.
Yeah, make it better. Now, the issue of defense spending, I brought this up several times last week. That's always treated as the sacred cow. Can never touch defense spending, no matter how woke the Pentagon is, no matter how much scrutiny the Pentagon needs for its failures. We all support our men and women in uniform, but the idea that 55% of our discretionary budget can't be touched, Those numbers don't add up with the cuts that you all want, correct? Unless you guys ultimately start thinking about cutting parts of the military.
We're certainly going to have to look at a number of things to get this budget to balance.
What's the number of things? You can't get away with that on the show. What number of things?
Many things that we're going to look at, but defense is
That's the biggest number, isn't it?
It is. That is absolutely one of them, and we have a lot of defense hawks.
I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if like the GOP, which is really, really exciting to see, because you've seen the Republican Party push for lots of spending. They've complained about the Republicans increasing the deficit, and then they go on and increase the deficit by a little bit less than what a Democrat would do. You know, a big outlier of that was Donald Trump, who just like really caused you know, the deficit increases to balloon, in large part because of the stimmy packages that he signed during COVID-19. But still, you know, it's really interesting and kind of weird to see the Republican Party actually calling for a smaller government that spends less money. I can't remember the last time that we've seen that in American politics from the Republican Party writ large.
In the House of Representatives that are probably going to put up a fight for that. But we have to have a budget that actually balances, and that's what this
Congressman
rule
Gaetz
is
on that.
forward.
That's the defense issue.
That'll
the
be
hawks
interesting
in the Republican Party.
Because I don't think we've even had a balanced budget since Bill Clinton. I think he was like the last person to lead the charge towards having a balanced budget. So that's kind of interesting too.
Some of the Democrat Party are saying, no. You can't touch that. I heard the comments even tonight. You can't touch the defense. You're being irresponsible with national security. The Wall Street Journal had a very powerful piece today. National security is at risk with what you guys did.
I represent the district that
And here again, we have the mainstream media trying to oppose these conservative policies. Right? He's trying to push back. You guys are bad. You guys are being bad boys for trying to shrink the government, for trying to shrink the Department of Defense. Nobody cares. We all know that we're spending way too much money. If we weren't trying to run our eyes and do pseudo colonizing, then we wouldn't even be in a situation where the Department of Defense is spending this much money. We spend so much money to protect countries that won't spend a dime on their own security. I think that might be a good portion of what the DoD might be involved with. Like, there's just so much that we spend money on that we really don't need to spend money on. And the government's just become so bloated. And the mainstream is always going to be pushing for having bigger government, more robust government. The Republicans on places like Fox News might be like, oh, well, you know, it is bad for Democrats to make the government bigger, but I mean, they're not going to say a word when other Republicans want to do the same thing, like Trump. You never really saw Fox News report on how much Donald Trump contributed to American spending. Did you? No. So Fox News is just kind of like hypocritical when it comes to their stance on spending.
It has the highest concentration of active duty military in the country, and we can defend this country and project power more efficiently and more effectively than we do. President Trump was the first president to demand an audit of the Pentagon, and they couldn't pass it.
He didn't cut defense
Well,
spending.
we got an audit so we show where they fail to actually deliver on some of the authority. And how about we start with Ukraine before we reduce what we do for
Yo, that's crazy. We have spent so much money to Ukraine. We've probably sent enough money like to where if we like transferred all the money into cash, $1 bills, it would probably completely smother the entirety of Russia as if it was like Pompeii Part 2. Yet we've spent like $3-4 billion over the past like 3 months on Ukraine. What has Ukraine done with the money? Where is the state-of-the-art technology and military weapons that they've built with the most recent spending package of money that we've given to Ukraine? What is their next military strategy for the next 2 weeks to beat Russia? What have they done in the past 2 weeks to beat Russia? What are the most recent gains that Ukraine has made in the fight against Russia? We don't know. The news is not covering this anymore. It's almost as if not much is happening, not much is changing, and $4 billion isn't going to turn the tide, because I don't know what Ukraine is doing with the money, but it doesn't really sound like they're using it. Excuse me. It doesn't really sound like they're using it to win the war. And I know that's kind of a sidebar. I'm kind of getting stunlocked by my own, stunlocked by one sentence that Laura Ingraham said. But yeah, that also is like a frustrating thing. We're spending like way too much money. Way too much money.
For our troops, I think it's a pretty easy case to make that some of this money that we send to Ukraine without requisite accountability should be the first place for reduction.
All right, we got to play this video. This was the real dramatic video on Friday night. So we were live 10 to 11, and all this stuff was happening an hour and minutes after we got off the air.
Oh, yeah,
it's one of the most talked about
crazy
moments. McCarthy comes over toward you. You see it gets heated. Lauren, is that you right next to us? Yeah, there are you. Now, Fox News reported that you appeared to mouth the word committee during this exchange. I guess you had a lip reader. Congressman, the world wants to know what was said here.
Yeah, I want to know
what was
said.
What was said?
Well, this was a matter of timing, and those of us who had withheld our support for Speaker McCarthy wanted to move as a group. We thought it could be a unifying moment. I'm glad that, to Speaker McCarthy's great credit, in the final moments he made the requisite concessions to bring our team together and put us in a great position to do what we did tonight, vote to get rid of 87,000 IRS agents. So I think that, you know, the imperial speakership is over. Nancy Pelosi will be the last imperial speaker, because now we're going to unlock the potential in all the members, and I'm glad that Speaker McCarthy saw it that way.
Now, I also saw that you both were talking to various Democrats during the process, and you especially
that
were
was
talking
really interesting. That was cool to see.
Congresswoman Jayapal and others. Was there any thought of a deal with Democrats during this process ever?
Absolutely not. I was actually.
You look pretty cozy talking to the Democrats.
Well,
nothing wrong with that. I mean, they're fun people, just like Republicans.
If you want to know what I was talking with Congresswoman Jayapal about, it was about the big tech legislation that I supported with her to break up these companies, and we were talking about, during Republican control, could we get those bills to the floor that Nancy Pelosi wouldn't bring to the floor while her husband was trading big tech stocks?
Could you work with some people on the left on some of these issues, Congresswoman Boehbert? Because, you know, you guys are vilified.
Right.
You know, people were tough on you last week. I was kind of tough on you last week, but there were a lot of great things that were done because of what you guys did.
Now that the dust is settled, they're going to pretend that that they're all fine now. Everything's fine now. But the mainstream media was very, very vicious against these folks. I can't believe that more people didn't see through Fox News's coverage of this whole situation.
They had to hold out on this stuff. So could you guys work together?
I believe that the Congress is going to be much stronger than it was going into this. The Republican Party, and we will be able to work with some Democrats.
Good.
There were many Democrats who campaigned on conservative values, and I want to hold them to it. They were talking about securing a border and reducing inflation and energy independence even. And this was a battle in a lot of elections that we were seeing. So I want to hold
you'd be surprised at how bipartisan having border security is. Like, that's looking at a lot of these people's campaigns. You may be surprised. Now, maybe it's just a lot of local people at local state levels tapping into the needs and wants of the voters. But I mean, I found it kind of heartening.
Hold them to those promises and bring them into the committees and have these discussions to actually move things forward.
That would be
and get
ironic.
America back on track.
Yeah, that would be ironic if it were more bipartisan as a result of all this.
Right.
We'll see.
Yeah, that's true. That was great. That was cool. Now, I'm not the biggest fan of Matt Gaetz, especially considering, he's got the whole allegations against him, which he couldn't even properly rebut, which I think is the biggest red flag when it comes to, getting accused of stuff. Like, if you can't even plainly say, no, I didn't do it, I think that's probably one of the biggest red flags that you can do. But still, I think that what they've done here is great and commendable. So I'm really excited to see how things shake out and what the GOP House does moving forward.